turns him into a new Wave Rider. And he comes out looking exactly like the original Wave Rider. He has the same power set, the same level of knowledge and intelligence, and he's one of the people who is at the forefront in the last act of Zero Hour. I call this an attempt at rehabilitation because this Wave Rider was someone who had a fresh slate. This was not a Wave Rider who destroyed his own timeline. That's one of the tragic elements that was lost amidst the furor of 2001. The great tragedy for Wave Rider was that through his hubris, through getting caught up in exploring all these various timelines, he allowed the Monarch to come 10 years before he was meant to arrive. And in so doing, that destroyed Wave Rider's timeline. Not just his timeline, it erased a whole timeline. And Wave Rider found that as a result, his marriage was dissolved. His children were wiped from existence. So Wave Rider had a lot of guilt coming out of 2001. But this newly created Wave Rider had none of that. He was Matthew Rider from our timeline, who didn't grow up and come of age in the time of Monarch. So he was able to lead the heroes with a clear conscience. And I think Dan Jurgens did that as a way of trying to erase the stink of Armageddon 2001 and make Wave Rider a character who would still be viable years after the event. This would be a way of presenting a Wave Rider who wasn't associated with 2001. He was associated with Zero Hour. The problem with that, though, by taking away that aspect of guilt from Wave Rider, actually hurt the character, because in later stories, Wave Rider appeared as a much weaker character. He was rather unceremoniously killed off in the 52 Weekly series by a Mr. Mind-controlled Skeets. His essence would later be absorbed by Leary, who would become the Linear Woman, and then during the whole DC Convergence event, which a lot of fans have theorized has been rendered a dead timeline in itself thanks to Rebirth, the pre-Flashpoint Booster Gold ended up merging with the timeline and becoming a new Wave Rider. So Mr. Jurgens' attempts to make this a viable character, in the end, I don't think really succeeded. I think of Wave Rider's present-day legacy. He's inspired the name of the ship piloted by Sarah Lance and crew on Legends of Tomorrow. Would be kind of interesting to see if Wave Rider does come back in the post-Rebirth era, but kind of doubtful about that given his declining appearances since 1991. Now, as for Monarch, in the beginning, Monarch was supposed to be an A++ level villain. He was going to be this very compelling character who would appear across all of the DCU titles. And so that was a real loss for the company with the result of 2001 and the fan outcry. So again, like I said in part one, I think Zero Hour would have happened regardless of what came out of Armageddon. But clearly there was an effort to rehabilitate the Monarch and make him something different, more fearsome and more viable during Zero Hour. And step one was to turn him into Extant in the two-part prelude story, which appeared in Showcase 94. But it seems to me that by the end of the Zero Hour event itself, Mr. Jurgens realized that fans really weren't going to take to Hank Hall in his newest form. I just think of how in the last issue of Zero Hour, X10 basically says, oops, I gotta go, and just blinks out of existence rather unceremoniously. And, looking back at it, the other characters don't really seem to care. They're just like, okay, leave it be. And I think that's Mr. Jurgens realizing that fans really weren't going to buy X10 as a major A++ level villain. Hal Jordan as Parallax was going to be that top tier villain. So this was Mr. Jurgens' way of saying, okay, fans, putting this to rest. I've always felt that Mr. Jurgens has a very healthy level of respect for the fandom. But the rehabilitation of Monarch didn't end there. In the Extreme Justice series, which followed Zero Hour, Captain Atom actually met up with the Monarch, who revealed that he was the real Nathaniel Adam. The Monarch explained that in the experiment which sent Nathaniel Adam 20 years into the future, Captain Atom was a byproduct. He was an artificially sentient, quantum-based clone of Nathaniel Adam. And so in his rage over what had happened to him, Nathaniel Adam decided to become the Monarch. And so this was sort of DC's way of saying, okay, fans, you want Captain Atom to be the Monarch? Well, we want to have Captain Atom too. So let's say it was Nathaniel Adam who became the Monarch. How about that? Some fans actually liked it. I thought it was a kind of a neat idea. But what I really liked was in the Robinson, Goyer, and Johns run of JSA, where the JSA found that Dawn Granger was actually alive. And she revealed to them that when the Monarch appeared to come forward in 1991, it was actually Mordru who created this whole illusion that the Monarch was an older Hank Hall and that he killed Dove. This was all part of a plot by Mordru to get Hank to break down, assume the powers of the Monarch. And then shortly after Armageddon, Mordru physically took over Hank, physically impregnated Dawn so that she would give birth to a child who had the powers of both the Lords of Order and Chaos. And of course, this child was the Fate baby, the baby who in the first arc of JSA was revealed to be inhabited by the soul of the recently reincarnated Hector Hall. The Fate baby grew to adulthood when brought into contact with the helm of Naboo, and thus Dr. Fate was born. Now, as part of this revelation, Dawn explained to the JSA that no one really knew who the real Monarch was, because the Monarch who came forward in 1991, presumably from the future, was just an illusion. So yes, it was tragic that Hank Hall ended up becoming the Monarch, but he wasn't supposed to. It was a result of interference by Mordru. So what's really nice is that this was Robinson and Goyer and Johns' way of saying to fans, okay, you know what? Screwed up there years back. Why don't we just say that we never figured out who the Monarch really was? Let's make that one of DC's greatest unsolved mysteries. I kind of like that. And you can also combine that, though, with the reveal in Extreme Justice, where you see that Nathaniel Adam was, in fact, the original Monarch years down the line in the future. but he was not the one who stepped forward. So presumably, that monarch, the Nathaniel Adam monarch, found his timeline destroyed, and so in extreme justice, he managed to find a way to come back in time to escape the destruction of his native future. Wow, timey-wimey stuff indeed. But folks, this rehabilitation of the monarch took place over the course of 15 years. Of course, during Countdown to Final Crisis, Captain Adam's physical form would be punctured, and so an underground group would coat him with a suit of armor, and he ended up becoming the monarch there, taking a villainous turn, taking on Superman Prime in Countdown, before being shot into an alternate dimension and then coming back as an amnesiac Captain Adam. So even Captain Adam, in the end, needed some rehabilitation there. And of course, in Blackest Night, Hank Hall was resurrected and came back as Hawk. And I can't really remember Hank Hall talking about having any memory of being the monarch. I got the sense that when Hank Hall was resurrected in Blackest Night, he was kind of rebooted to a younger version of himself. So he was missing quite a few memories there. Memories which nobody really cared to bring up. So folks, in closing, question is, should Armageddon 2001 be celebrated or reviled? I'd say the concept, the plan, the original plan for its execution should certainly be admired. It was something new, something unique. The introduction of a new hero and a new top-tier villain are always something to be appreciated. But given the handling of the leak and the somewhat clumsy revised ending, I wouldn't say this is a story which should be celebrated. But at the same time, I don't think it's a story which should be reviled. If anything, it provides a neat time capsule of sorts. It's really neat seeing what the DCU looked like back in 1991. And again, if you read it without any of that historical context, it does make for an interesting read. And some of those annuals, especially ones I talked about here in episodes 1 or parts 1 and 2 of this episode, really well written. Outside of the New Titans annual, the other ones can all be enjoyed as standalone chapters, completely aside from Armageddon 2001. So, in closing, folks, if you see the two bookends and the annuals in 50-cent bins or 75-cent or even dollar bins at a store or con, try picking them up. Give them a read. They're certainly not the worst thing you'll ever read. And it's just, it makes for a really interesting history lesson. So I'm really glad that they was able to review this story in celebration of 5 years of comics and history. Folks, not sure what's on the agenda for the next episode, so stay tuned for an update on the Comics and History Facebook page. I think I might just take a look at a couple of one and done stories from yesteryear before getting back into my spotlight treatment on the Spectre. If you want to email me, it's comicsandhistory@gmail.com. Love to hear your feedback on this, as well as other episodes of the show. All right, my friends and listeners, until another 14 days have come and gone, this class is dismissed.